What happens after death? The Buddhist truth about death, karma, and rebirth. What if everything you've ever believed about death was only half the story? Picture this. I was sitting beside my mother as she drew her final breath. The rain outside tapped softly against the glass, and the oxygen machine hummed its last steady rhythm. Her hand was cold in mine. I whispered a single Buddhist chant, Namo Amitabha, and then silence. But in that stillness, I didn't feel loss. I didn't feel an ending. I felt movement, a transfer, like the flame of one candle lighting the wick of another. This is not just my story. It's a moment that comes for all of us, at 55 or 85, suddenly or slowly. And yet, how many of us are truly prepared to face it? What really happens after death? Does the soul continue? Is there a next life, a reckoning, a return, or something entirely different? In today's video, we explore these questions not with speculation, but through the lens of 2,500-year-old Buddhist wisdom. This isn't a dry lecture. This is a personal journey, one that combines spiritual philosophy, real-life stories, and practical insights, especially for those of us who have seen more sunsets than sunrises. So don't just watch the beginning. Stay with me through the end, because this video is packed with insights that can ease your fear, deepen your understanding, and maybe, just maybe, change how you live, not just how you die. If this message touches something deep in you, please do 3 things: like, subscribe, and comment below. Tell us your thoughts, your stories, or even just how this made you feel. This channel is a space for awakening souls, and your presence here is no accident. Now, take a deep breath, and let's sit together like old friends in a quiet temple garden and explore this timeless mystery, not with fear, but with a curious, open heart. Chapter 1. The Nature of Life and Death, a compassionate reflection on impermanence and letting go. There's something sacred about watching leaves fall. It's not just the color or the motion. It's the reminder that everything, no matter how brilliant, has its time. And when that time ends, it lets go, without protest, without fear. That, to me, is one of the most beautiful teachings Buddhism offers. Impermanence, or in Pali, anicca. We say the word often in Dharma halls, but truly understanding it, that takes a lifetime, or maybe several. Impermanence isn't a punishment. It's not a flaw in the system. It is the system. Everything that begins must end. Every body that rises will fall. Every laugh eventually turns into silence. But within that movement, within that truth, is a freedom so vast, it can unshackle even the most burdened heart. I remember a conversation I had in northern Thailand, outside a temple near Chiang Mai. An elderly woman was sweeping the temple steps. Her face was carved by sun and sorrow, but her eyes were kind. She told me without ceremony that she had lost all 3 of her children in a car crash when she was only 40. I asked how she could keep smiling. She said, "The sky cries when it needs to, then it clears. I'm just the same. When I miss them, I cry like the sky, but I don't carry the storm." That's anicca in action. Not in theory, but in bone-deep reality. Buddhist teachers often remind us, it is not life's brevity that causes suffering, but our refusal to let it be brief. We fight the current. We cling to youth, to love, to certainty. But water held too tightly slips through our fingers, and so does life. Western culture often treats aging like a slow tragedy. Wrinkles must be erased. Gray hair must be dyed, but Buddhism sees it differently. To age is to ripen. It's the slow unfolding of all your causes and conditions coming to bloom. In the monastic communities I've sat with, the most respected teachers were not the loudest or most charismatic. They were the eldest. Why? Because they knew They had worn these teachings like robes, not costumes. They had lived impermanence, and it softened them, not into weakness but into wisdom. One of the great Tibetan teachers said, "Don't measure a person's depth by their words. Measure it by their ability to let go." And letting go, my friend, is the most courageous art of all. Letting go is not abandonment. It's not resignation. It is, in truth, the most loving thing we can do for ourselves and for others. I've counseled people in hospice care, men and women facing their final days. And here's what I've learned. It's not death they fear. It's leaving behind the ones they love. There's an ache, a tightness in the chest, as if love itself were something we must physically carry with us. But the Buddha spoke of this tenderness too. He taught that attachment leads to suffering, not because we shouldn't love, but because we love with our fists clenched. We confuse love with possession, but love that clings becomes fear. And love that frees becomes peace. Imagine you are holding a bird too tightly and you harm it, too loosely and it flies away. But hold it with presence, care, and gentle curiosity, and it may choose to stay. This is how we are invited to love our children, our partners, our very lives, with compassion, not control. I met a retired violinist once, aged 83, who told me, "I've spent my whole life preparing to let go, not of people, but of needing things to stay the same." That's the heart of Buddhist wisdom. Now some recoil at the idea of contemplating death. Why be so morbid, they ask. But Maranasati, the practice of reflecting on death, is not meant to depress. It's meant to awaken. Every morning before I even pour my tea, I say silently to myself, "Today might be my last. If so, how shall I live it?" That one sentence does more for my peace of mind than any self-help book or morning affirmation ever could. Because it doesn't lie. It doesn't flatter. It calls me back to what is real. Contemplating death doesn't make us dark. It makes us deliberate. We stop waiting to say, "I love you." We stop numbing ourselves with noise. We stop pretending we'll have time someday. Maranasati reminds us, someday is not a guarantee, and that is not a threat, it's a blessing. Because it means today matters. There was a woman in her 70s I once sat with in hospice. Her name was Ellen. Her breath was shallow, her skin like paper, but her mind, sharp. She told me she'd made peace with her regrets. She said what she needed to say. She was ready, but her daughter, 40 years old and holding back tears, was not. Ellen reached out and whispered, "Sweetheart, I'm not going far. I'm just going where you can't see me right now." That moment stuck with me because it wasn't just comforting, it was true. From the Buddhist view, the end of this body is not the end of the journey. Consciousness flows, energy continues, karma unfolds. But even without belief in rebirth, Ellen's words held weight. She was already free, not because she denied death, but because she welcomed it as part of life's natural tide. That is what letting go looks like. Life is not a fixed performance, it's a dance. One step leads to another, always moving. Some steps are graceful, others clumsy, but all of them are fleeting. Impermanence teaches us not to freeze the frame, but to stay fluid. To be with what is. Joy, sorrow, gain, loss, they're all just moments passing through. The more we practice seeing this truth, the less we suffer when things shift, and the more deeply we can love while they last. The flowers bloom, and then they fall. The breath comes in, and then it leaves. Your favorite song ends, your favorite people do too, but none of it is meaningless. On the contrary, it is their impermanence that makes them precious. Chapter 2. What continues after we die? Understanding non-self through the eyes of wisdom. Most of us grow up with the idea that we are someone, a me with a history, a future, a personality. Our name, our job, our memories, the way our mother held our face in her hands when we were children. These all feel like the building blocks of who we are. But Buddhism offers a gentle and at times radical invitation. What if this self you hold so tightly is more like a mirage? Not a lie, but a reflection, something that appears solid when viewed from a distance but dissolves as you move closer. This teaching is called anatta or non-self. It's not easy for the mind to grasp at first, and it's not meant to be a rejection of our humanity. Rather, it's a compassionate doorway into freedom. Think of it this way. You see a flame dancing on a candle. You can see it. You can describe it. But can you ever say it's the same flame from one second to the next? It's never fixed. Always moving, always reshaped by air, wax, and wick. The flame exists, yes, but not as a separate, unchanging entity. That's what we are, a continuous process, not a permanent thing. A flow of thoughts, emotions, sensations, actions, rising and falling like waves. And here's the profound comfort in that insight. If there is no permanent self to cling to, then there is also no fixed self to fear losing. Let's take a more grounded image. A river, maybe you've sat by one. Maybe you've lived by one all your life. Let's say it's the Hudson, the Mekong, the Red River. You've seen it during monsoons and droughts. You've watched logs float by, children splash in it, ducks land softly on its surface. You know that river, but you also know that the water today is not the water of yesterday. It's always moving, always becoming something new. Still, you call it the same name. This is how Buddhism views the self. There is continuity, but not identity. The stream continues not by holding itself together, but by letting itself change. And so, when we ask, what continues after we die? The answer is not a fixed soul, but the momentum of consciousness. The karmic stream. The flow of causes and conditions that, like a river, turns but does not vanish. In the West, karma is often misunderstood as cosmic punishment or divine justice. But in Buddhist thought, karma is neither reward nor retribution. Karma is cause and effect. Karma is tendencies repeated until they become identity. The actions we take, the words we speak, even the thoughts we dwell on, they shape the next ripple in the stream. One monk described karma to me like this. It's not what you do once, it's what you lean toward. Karma is the groove in the record that your needle keeps falling into. Let's imagine a candle lighting another. The flame is passed, not transferred like a coin, but transmitted as continuity. The second flame is not identical to the first, but it would not exist without it. That is rebirth, not of a self, but of energy with intention. When the body falls away, what remains? Not your memories, not your name, but the pattern of your consciousness, the flavor of your mind, your karma. It's as if, through every act of compassion, kindness, or cruelty, we are stitching a tapestry. And when this life ends, the needle doesn't stop. It simply moves to the next cloth with the same thread. This is why ethical living matters, not because we're scared of hell, but because we are always becoming what we practice. You plant mango seeds, you grow mangoes. You plant thorns, you grow thorns. Karma is not judgment. Karma is continuity. Let me tell you a story from California. I once sat with an elderly man named Richard, 78 years old, recovering from major heart surgery. At one point, his heart stopped for several minutes before doctors revived him. When he woke, his voice was hoarse, but his eyes were wide with clarity. I saw everything and nothing, he said. I wasn't in my body, I wasn't even me, but I wasn't afraid. It was like being light. Like I finally remembered who I was before I thought I had to be someone. He didn't convert to Buddhism, but he became gentler, softer. He forgave his children, he cried easily, he walked in nature every morning. He said, I don't need to know what's next. I just know I'm not taking my anger with me. That too is the fruit of contemplating non-self. The idea of no self can feel unsettling. If I am not this body, not these thoughts, not this name, then what am I? The answer is both startling and liberating. You are not a thing, you are a process, a becoming, a sacred unfolding. And because you are not fixed, you are not doomed. You are not stuck. You are free to change, to awaken, to begin again, even now, even here, even at the threshold of death. That is the gift of non-self. That is the freedom of impermanence. That is the doorway to compassion. Chapter 3, Karma and its Subtle Mechanics, the Engine of Becoming. If you ask the average person about karma, they'll probably say something like, "What goes around comes around," or "She got what was coming to her." But these interpretations, while catchy, miss the quiet precision and profound freedom within true Buddhist karma. Karma is not a cosmic punishment system, nor is it some universal scoreboard in the sky. It isn't fate, and it's not blind revenge. Karma doesn't get you. Karma is you, more precisely, what you're becoming through your choices. In Sanskrit, karma simply means action. Not action as in movement alone, but intentional action. Every word you speak, every thought you dwell on, every breath you take in awareness or reactivity, these are all karmic seeds. They grow roots, flower into habits, and eventually define the world you live in, both inside and out. And the most striking part? Karma isn't something that happens to you. It's something you create moment by moment. Let's imagine a garden. You walk outside every morning with a basket of seeds. Some are sunflower seeds, joy, kindness, honesty. Others are weeds, resentment, pride, fear. Whatever you plant, whether knowingly or not, will shape the field you walk through tomorrow. The Buddha put it this way: "It is volition, monks, that I call karma. For having willed, one acts by body, speech, and mind." Notice the emphasis on volition, the intention behind the action. Two people may donate money to charity. One does it with love, the other does it out of guilt or pride. The action is the same, but the karma is not. You don't have to be a monk or nun to see this in daily life. Think of an elderly neighbor you smile at every morning. You might never know how much your warmth matters to them, but you're planting joy. Or picture someone who honks angrily in traffic every day, spreading stress like wildfire. That energy doesn't disappear. It echoes. The truth is, we're all gardeners. Every moment we're planting something. The only question is, what are we growing? So what happens to all that planted karma when we die? This is where Buddhism parts ways with many other traditions. In Buddhism, we don't carry a soul to the next life. There's no fixed self being reincarnated. Instead, we carry momentum, a karmic stream of energy and intention. Imagine lighting a candle from another candle. The flame passes on, not exactly the same, yet not entirely different. This is how rebirth happens. The old karma gives rise to a new experience. The body changes, the circumstances shift, but the tendencies, the inclinations, the tone of consciousness, those echo forward. A Thai master once said, "When you die with a mind full of fear, that fear carries into the next arising. But if you die with love, with trust, with clarity, then you carry peace into your next form." I once sat with a woman named Ruth in a hospice in New Mexico. She was 94, widowed, quiet, and utterly at peace. She told me, "I forgave a long time ago. I've got nothing left to hold on to. I hope if there's another life, I carry this lightness with me." I told her, "Ruth, you already are. What we often call personality in this life, our habits, preferences, fears, can be viewed as accumulated karma. Not in a deterministic sense, but in the sense that our repeated mental and emotional patterns leave grooves, like tracks on a record. And those grooves continue playing even if the song changes. Have you ever met a child who was wise beyond their years? Or someone with an unexplainable fear or talent? From the Buddhist perspective, these aren't miracles or mysteries. They are karmic imprints, unfinished threads of memory from a past existence, now expressing themselves again. One young girl I met in Nepal could play complex Tibetan mantras on a traditional drum without ever being taught. Another boy in Vietnam would weep uncontrollably at funerals from the time he was 4, despite never having lost a family member. Coincidence? Maybe. But karma doesn't forget. It simply waits for the right conditions to unfold. If karma were destiny, Buddhism would be a prison. But the exact opposite is true. The Buddha was very clear: karma is malleable. It can be purified, transformed, redirected. One moment of clarity can shift a lifetime of confusion. One act of compassion can rewrite a painful past. You are not trapped by your karma. You are in relationship with it. You can change its course right now. The wheel of samsara, birth and death, joy and suffering, spins because of unconscious karma. The moment we act from mindfulness instead of habit, the wheel slows. The moment we choose compassion over reaction, we begin to walk a different path. As the great teacher Ajahn Chah said, "It is not necessary to think so much. Just become aware, the rest will take care of itself." Let me share a story. In Laos, I met a man who had spent nearly 30 years in prison. His crimes were severe, his bitterness was deeper. He came out angry, hollowed out by regret and rage. But he wandered into a monastery, mostly for the free rice. An old monk welcomed him, said nothing, and offered him a cushion to sit. No judgment, just presence. Over the years, the man began to sit quietly each day. He learned to follow his breath, to watch his thoughts. Slowly, his face softened. His words softened. Eventually, he began teaching young boys by the river how to sit, how to breathe, how to forgive. One afternoon, he told me, "I used to think karma cursed me, but now I see I was just sowing storms, and now I plant quiet." Buddhist karma is not about guilt. It's not about moralistic shame. It's about awareness. It's about responsibility. It's about becoming who you truly are beneath your reactivity. It's the ultimate empowerment. You are the painter of your life. And yes, you may have inherited a canvas already covered in strange colors. But with each stroke, each breath, each choice, each act of kindness, you are painting something new. That is karma's secret. It doesn't lock you in, it invites you out. Chapter 4, Rebirth Without Fear, Compassionate Journeys Across Lifetimes. In Western minds, reincarnation is often imagined as a revolving door. You exit one life and re-enter another, almost like checking into a new hotel with the same luggage. Same identity, same soul, different setting. But the Buddhist perspective is subtler, more elegant. Rebirth in Buddhism isn't the return of a permanent self. It's the continuation of momentum, a movement of energy, not ego. Like wind traveling from one wind chime to another, different melodies but the same breeze. That's the essence of rebirth. Not a rerun, but a recreation. The flame that passes from one candle to the next isn't identical. But without the first, the second couldn't light. Similarly, we are not reborn as ourselves in a new outfit. We are reborn as the result of our intentions, our actions, our habits of heart. And once you understand that, rebirth is no longer something to fear. It's simply the next page. You may have heard that Buddhist texts speak of 6 realms of rebirth. Deva realm, gods, filled with pleasure, ease, and detachment. Asura realm, demigods, driven by competition, jealousy, and ego. Human realm, balanced between joy and suffering and the best for awakening. Animal realm ruled by instinct, fear, and survival. Hungry ghost realm, beings consumed by craving and addiction. Hell realm, states of overwhelming pain, rage, and hopelessness. So, are these real places? Literal afterlife destinations? Maybe, maybe not. But what's far more useful and far more immediate is to realize that these realms aren't just cosmic neighborhoods. They're states of consciousness. We visit them all the time. That anxious mother scrolling social media at 3 a.m., comparing her life to strangers. She's in the Asura realm, the billionaire who has everything but can't feel love. Possibly in the Deva realm, numb, floating above real life. The person you know who's caught in endless cycles of addiction, longing, and grief. That's the hungry ghost realm. And then there's you, watching this video, reflecting, questioning, seeking peace. That means you're in the human realm, the rarest and most precious of them all. Why? Because here is where awareness blossoms. Here is where the Buddha walked and woke up. Buddhism doesn't frame rebirth as punishment, it frames it as curriculum. Every life, every situation, every body we inhabit is shaped by past momentum and perfectly tailored for present growth. I remember meeting a woman in Vietnam who was born blind, but her insight was luminous. Her speech precise, her presence disarming. When I asked if she ever felt angry at her fate, she said, "I may not have eyes, but I see clearly how to love." Her blindness didn't close her heart, it opened it. Maybe her karma brought that condition, but her awareness transformed it into clarity. That's what we do. We take what we're given and we make it holy. No matter where you begin, the question is always, what are you doing with this life? Don't wait for the end of life to get familiar with it. That's what one of my favorite teachers told me, sipping tea under a frangipani tree. He had been a hospice chaplain for years and had seen hundreds of deaths. People fear death because they haven't rehearsed it, he said. They haven't practiced letting go. Buddhism invites us to rehearse, not through drama or fear, but through contemplation and kindness. We practice letting go every time we release a grudge. We practice dying every time we forgive. We practice rebirth every time we change. That's why Buddhist death rituals are so serene. There's no wailing, no flailing, there's incense. Chanting, reflection. Why? Because we're not saying goodbye, we're honoring the movement of energy. When you see death this way, it's not a punishment, it's a threshold, a pause between chapters, a release. Will I see my loved ones again? This is the question I'm asked more than any other. Will I see my spouse again? Will I be reunited with my mother? Will my child return to me? Here's what the Buddha taught. While there are no guarantees, strong karmic bonds often reappear. The love you've truly given is never lost. It becomes part of the karmic thread that weaves through lifetimes. But the Buddhist path doesn't encourage us to cling to reunion. It asks us to trust in love's transcendence. If you've ever been loved deeply and truly loved in return, you know this. That love changes you. It becomes you. And so even if you never meet in the same form again, the ripple continues. You might become a stranger's blessing, a whisper of warmth in someone's loneliness, a comforting hand they don't know how to name. Love never ends, it just changes shape. There's a story that takes place in Chiang Mai. I once stayed in a village where an old woman, Mi Chai, was said to be visited often by her late husband, not in ghostly form, but in everyday kindnesses. "I see him in the young boy who brings me mangoes," she said. "I hear his laughter in the wind. He told me before he died, I'll come back as comfort. And now when I'm sad, someone always knocks at my door." You can believe what you like about spirits and signs. But the truth is, when love is strong, it leaves footprints. We may not meet the same people again, but we never stop being connected. Understanding rebirth with wisdom doesn't just ease our own fear, it softens our view of others. That rude stranger, maybe he's early in his karmic journey. That child who seems old beyond her years. Maybe she's walked this path before. That partner you can't seem to understand. Maybe they were once your teacher, maybe they are again. When you walk through the world with the eyes of rebirth, you walk gently. You see not just behavior, but momentum. Not just conflict, but potential. Not just people, but travelers just like you. You don't have to rush, but you do have to walk. One man in his 70s said to me once, "I wish I'd learned all this sooner." I smiled and said, "Maybe you did. Maybe you're just remembering it now." There's no race in the Dharma, only direction. Whether you've just begun to walk this path or you've been circling for lifetimes, the same question always remains. What will you carry into the next life? Anger or acceptance? Fear or faith? Resistance or release? The choice is always yours, not just at death, but in every moment of life. Chapter 5. The Journey to Liberation, the Quiet Path Out of Samsara. Liberation in Buddhist teaching has long been misunderstood. Some imagine it as escape, a celestial exit ramp that lifts us out of the pain and mess of human life. Others think it's some final reward after enough years of good behavior. But the Buddha didn't speak of liberation as reward or escape. He spoke of it as clarity, as peace so deep it no longer depends on circumstance. The word nirvana literally means to blow out, but what's being extinguished isn't life. It's delusion. The flame of craving, fear, and ignorance is gently snuffed out, and in its place arises stillness, spaciousness. The kind of peace that doesn't flinch, doesn't cling, doesn't fight for control. You don't need to wait for death to know this peace. In fact, liberation begins now with each honest breath. With each time we stop trying to fix the moment and instead allow it to just be. The journey toward liberation is rarely loud. It doesn't depend on a retreat in the Himalayas or mastering ancient scriptures. More often it begins with small, almost invisible choices. You pause before reacting. You speak a little less. You give without expecting thanks. You sit in the morning sun with no agenda but presence. This is what elder monks and nuns practice each day, not as a performance, but as a habit of the heart. Many live with nothing but a robe, a bowl, and a heart unburdened. And they are rich, not in possessions, but in inner spaciousness. A monk once told me, "Freedom begins when you stop needing so much." I thought he meant material things. But over time, I understood. He was also speaking of needing to be right, needing to be seen, needing to hold on to stories that no longer serve. The simpler the life, the wider the heart. For those of us over 50, the idea of freedom shifts. It's no longer about chasing dreams. It's about finding peace with what is. Our bodies age, our to-do lists shrink. But that's not decline. That's awakening's invitation. Aging isn't life shutting down. It's life asking us to turn inward, to breathe deeply, to reflect gently, to let go. The Buddha often compared aging to fruit on a branch. Just as a ripe fruit may fall at any moment, so too is the human body ready to fall. That's not morbid, it's tender. It's a reminder not to waste time. Every quiet act, brushing your hair, feeding a bird, lighting a candle, can be a doorway to mindfulness. A step toward liberation. Liberation at this stage of life doesn't come with fireworks. It arrives like a whisper. This moment is enough. We spend much of our lives building a self. We collect titles, relationships, roles, parent, spouse, teacher, manager. We defend our reputation, we protect our pride, we fear being forgotten. But none of these things are truly us. They are roles we've worn. Beautiful, important, but impermanent. A retired teacher once told me, "I spent most of my life trying to prove I mattered. Now I just want to be here." That's the pivot, when we stop performing and simply arrive. The Buddha never said you must erase your identity. He said, don't cling to it. Let it rise and fall like waves. Let yourself be something deeper than a story. Because once you let go of being someone, you finally become free. The Buddhist path doesn't end in a heaven of golden harps. It ends in stillness, a cessation of the need to keep returning. The Buddha was once asked, "What happens to the enlightened after death?" He responded with a question, "What happens to a flame when the oil runs dry?" There's no place it goes, it simply ends. Not with fear, not with resistance, but with peace. When there is nothing more to cling to, there is nothing to carry forward. That's the end of samsara. Not as a destination, but as a release. Like putting down a heavy bag you didn't realize you were carrying. There's a story of a Thai nun named Phra Kun Mi who sat beneath the same bodhi tree every morning for 40 years. She spoke very little. She ate only once a day. Yet everyone who met her said they felt lighter. When someone asked what she hoped to achieve, she smiled and said, "I don't meditate to gain anything. I meditate to remember I have nothing to lose." Another story comes from Japan. A man named Daichai was diagnosed with terminal cancer. He sold everything, not out of despair, but clarity. He spent his final 6 months walking barefoot through villages, bowing to trees and smiling at strangers. One villager said, "He smiled like he'd already arrived somewhere we hadn't." When he died, the whole village lit lanterns. Not to mourn, but to honor the path he walked with quiet feet and an open heart. Liberation isn't earned, it's revealed. It doesn't require perfection, it requires presence. You don't need to renounce your family, your home, or your joys. You need only renounce the grasping, the tightness, the belief that something else must happen before you can be at peace. The path out of samsara is not paved with grand gestures. It's paved with gentle steps, noticing your breath. Being kind when you don't have to be, forgiving without being asked, smiling at the sound of rain. These are the real milestones, and they are all available now, not someday, not when you're more spiritual. Now. The Buddha's last words were not fireworks or mystery, they were simple. All things are impermanent, strive on with diligence. He didn't say hurry, he didn't say fear. He said be steady, be sincere, stay awake. Because the goal isn't to escape life. The goal is to finally meet it, with eyes open, heart soft, and no need to hold on. That, my friend, is the quiet path out of samsara. Chapter 6. What truly matters before we die. There comes a moment, soft and inevitable, when everything gets quiet. The machines stop beeping, the footsteps slow. The tears have already been shed, the stories already told. The hand being held grows cool. And the breath that once animated a lifetime simply leaves. It doesn't slam the door behind it. It doesn't scream. It drifts, like mist rising from a morning field. And for those who have lived with awareness, that final breath is not darkness. It's not fear, it's not a fall. It's release. It's clarity. It's the silence at the end of a song, the moment just before you bow. In Buddhist thought, the final days of life are like a mirror held close to the mind. And what it reflects isn't our resumes or accolades. It reflects the deeper truth, the regrets we never spoke, the forgiveness we withheld, the kindness we offered quietly when no one was watching. A woman I once sat with in a hospice in Oregon, 87 years old, once a school teacher, whispered to me, "All I wanted was to not waste it. I know I wasn't perfect, but I tried to be kind." And that stayed with me. Because when everything else falls away, bank accounts, health, reputation, what remains is the tone of our heart. the quality of our presence, how we treated others when there was nothing to gain. That is what death reflects back to us. Not our past, but our practice. If there is one medicine that soothes the soul at life's end, it is forgiveness. Forgiveness, not as a transaction, but as a liberation. A loosening of the grip we've held for too long on old stories, old wounds, even the shame we carry silently for how we've treated ourselves. I've sat with veterans in their 70s who wept not over war, but over what they did to themselves afterward. I've held the hand of a woman who said, "I pushed everyone away because I didn't think I was worthy of being loved." And I've seen the softening, the melting when they finally whispered, "Maybe I can forgive myself." The Buddha taught that awareness is the first step to freedom, and forgiveness is awareness soaked in compassion. It doesn't erase the past, but it frees the heart to meet the present, unburdened, unarmored. When people speak of legacy, they often imagine big things, books, buildings, family empires. But ask anyone sitting at the bedside of a dying loved one what mattered most, and they'll say, "The way she looked at me, the way he listened, how she made me feel safe, how he never gave up on me." Legacy is not built in marble. It's built in moments, in the softness of our tone, in the patience of our eyes, in the way we greet the world with either hurry or reverence. A grandfather once told me, "I hope my grandchildren remember my hugs, not because they were special, but because I gave them every time they walked through the door." That, my friend, is immortality. In Buddhism, how we die is not just about how, it's about how present. Can we meet the moment not as a victim, not as a warrior, but as a witness, not clinging, not pushing away, just breathing into the truth of impermanence, with a soft heart. The great Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh often said, "It is not death that should be feared, it is living without mindfulness." To die well is to be awake at the end, not distracted, not desperate, but ready. I once watched a man in hospice close his eyes and whisper to his daughter, "I'm not leaving you, I'm just changing form." He exhaled, one long, final breath, and smiled. There was a man named Charles I visited in hospice care, 92 years old, tall and quiet, a retired postman who had delivered letters for 40 years and outlived most of his friends. He had no grand regrets, no unfinished bucket list. Each night before bed, he would repeat silently, "Let me be kind, let me be free." That was it. He didn't meditate formally. He didn't wear beads or robes. He just lived simply, helped his neighbors, tended his tomato plants, listened when others needed to talk. The morning he passed, the nurse said he seemed to smile in his sleep, like someone arriving home after a long walk. That is what it means to meet the end, not as a loss, but as a return. You don't need to be dying to reflect on death. You need only be alive, which means now, right now, is the perfect time to ask yourself, am I living with kindness? Am I present in my days? Am I letting go of what no longer serves me? Am I giving what I most long to receive? These questions are not for someday. They are for this hour, this breath, this moment where life meets you gently and says, "You don't have to wait to be free." Buddhism doesn't separate life from death. It sees them as partners in the same dance. The inhale and the exhale, the sunrise and the sunset, we begin dying the moment we are born. But we also begin awakening the moment we choose to live with awareness. You don't have to be fearless to meet death. You have to be willing to let go of the need to control, to impress, to postpone love or truth or apology. Because in the end, nothing matters more than how freely we give and how gently we let go. The Buddha said, "Just as a candle cannot burn without fire, men cannot live without a spiritual life." You are not too late. You are not too old. You are not too broken. Every moment you choose peace over pride, compassion over control, presence over panic, you are walking toward liberation. And when your last breath comes, may it not be with dread, but with a bow. A bow to all you have loved, lost, forgiven, and become. So live gently, forgive freely, and when it's time, let go with grace. That is the art of dying well, which, in truth, is the art of living wisely. A question to ponder. So what really matters in the end, before we take our final breath? It's not how much we earned, not how long we lived, not even how many people remember our name. It's how deeply we showed up, how courageously we forgave, how gently we let go. This video wasn't created to give you simple answers. It was made to awaken your deeper questions, the kind you feel, not just think. The kind that echo late at night when the world goes quiet. So if something inside you stirred, if a single breath in this journey made you pause, then let that be the beginning, not the end. Because what we explored together isn't just philosophy. It's preparation, it's reflection, it's your invitation to live and die on purpose. This video is packed with powerful teachings, woven from 2,500 years of Buddhist wisdom, modern insight, and lived stories. So if you skipped around, I encourage you to go back, watch it fully, let it settle, because every minute carries a lesson you might need, not now, but one day. Now it's your turn. Leave a comment below, share what touched you. Ask the question you've always been afraid to ask. Your voice matters in this space. And if this resonated with you, don't leave quietly. Tap that like button, hit subscribe, not for me, but for the part of you that wants to keep awakening. There's more to come, more stories, more insight, more chances to sit together like old friends beneath the great tree of life and look gently at the truth. Until then, live with presence, love without apology. And when the time comes, let go with grace.